Okay, Dreamer, please.
Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. We'll be checking out Shadow of Ambition for the first episode of the Guild Raid series that will be launched across the next 5 days. But before that, we'll be looking at his skill set. For his passive, he's able to evade all attacks with 70% chance and paralyze on basic attack. He also has 2 AoE skills, remove buffs on one and also blinds and decreases attack stat on the other. This makes Ares a must-have because she increases accuracy rate by 100%, so that is why she is basically a permanent member for this raid now. I'll talk about my other heroes. The reason why I'm using Fenrir is because of his top skill, and he is also able to increase crit and lethal damage and block nullify. Okay, I know some people may be thinking that, if you have Ares, you don't really need Fenrir, because Ares does boost lethal rate by 40%, which is enough. Okay, 10%, doesn't really matter unless you really can't get lethal rate to 100%. But the reason why Fenrir is here is because he helps me satisfy the 3 offensive hero criteria. And for that, you can actually use Dillo, and you can also use Cult. Cult increases physical attack of all offensive allies by 40%, and Dillo is able to increase the damage you deal to Shadow of Ambition by 30% and also increase your crit damage overall. So that is why I'm still using Fenrir, and I can't find a better replacement for him, to be honest. So the skill rotation for this raid isn't too complicated. Once you land a debuff with Yuri's bottom skill, you just follow up with Mei's skills and deal damage, and that's all. The optional skill is that you can use Fenrir's top skill to increase crit and lethal damage as well as block nullify Shadow of Ambition, so that you can guarantee that Mei's skills will be hitting very hard. How I usually queue for Mei's skills is that I use the bottom skill first and then I use the top skill, because the bottom skill is a pure damaging skill. The top skill does apply an exploit vulnerability buff, which I want to get as close as possible to her awakened skill. Okay, so that her awakened skill is able to utilize the most out of it and deal the most possible damage. And beyond that, there's really nothing much to the skill rotation here. Some things you do need to take note will be to look at Yuri's debuff. Okay, when it's running out, remember to cast it again so that you will not waste a turn and do nonsense damage, because without the debuff, your Mei will not be able to do good damage to it. This dragon is completely soloable as well, but the reason why I cannot solo this dragon is because I don't have the fighter soul to increase damage on offensive enemies. And if I do, I'm pretty much certain that my damage will increase a lot more and I can solo this entire run. Unfortunately, I can't solo this dragon. Just a disclaimer. Another tip for you is that you want Mei to do a lot of damage, so that is why you will probably be using the Berserker Ring for her, right? And the Berserker Ring works such that the lower Mei's HP, the more damage she will deal. But in this case, it's very difficult for Mei to get damage because you have Ares as a taunter, so basic attacks will not be hitting Mei. You can only rely on Shadow's counter attacks as well as Shadow skills, so that the damage can touch Mei. In this case, you will want to refrain from using Yuri's top skill, because Yuri's top skill decreases Shadow's attack by 80%, and that will have heavy damage mitigation, and that will also lead to less damage dealt to Mei and less damage output in return. You also don't want to use Ares' block rate increase, because block rate by 50%, block rate increase by 50% is also going to mitigate a lot of damage, and Mei will not be able to deal good enough damage in the time period that she has. The guild raid runs tend to last for about 30 turns. Okay, by turn 30, the dragon will have a spike in attack power, and by then, it's very difficult for you to survive beyond turn 35, turn 40. Okay, if you do have a healer, then you probably could, but in this case I don't. So you have to be very careful, with this, and you want to try to be able to do the most amount of damage within the first 30 turns. You see that my Mei is actually taking a long time to get her HP low, and of course there's also some RNG involved because sometimes the dragon may land crit or lethal hits on Mei, sometimes he won't, so these also affect. You also see that I'm holding back on Yuri's Awakened skill. The reason for this is because I want to make the most out of it. And the best time to use it is actually when Mei's HP is pretty low, so that she can make use of the increased damage dealt to offensive heroes, enemies multiplier the best, right? And in this case, I feel that Mei's HP is just really not low enough. She can go a lot lower, so that means you have to let Mei take more hits first. And I would say that, if a guild raid run is about 35 turns long, then at turn 29, it will be a good time. But then again, do keep in mind that this dragon does remove all buffs, right? So you want to cast Yuri's Awakened skill at a time when he is on cooldown. Hopefully, in the high 90s or high 80s, so that you can still use skills after using Yuri's Awakened skill. Because if you can't, then imagine using Yuri's Awakened skill and the next skill he does is to remove the buff. Then you completely just wasted a turn there and you didn't get anything done, right? So what you want to do is find a good time to cast Yuri's Awakened skill, and then you can still squeeze in more Mei skills within that period. That will get you the most amount of damage. But of course, you have to also play this carefully because you do want to do this when Mei is low in health. And I think this is the main challenge for the raid, whereby you want to time all these properly. But it's also sometimes, I understand, hard to control. And for me, of course, I can go up to turn 30. For you, sometimes, you may have some difficulty already in late turn 20s. Yeah. So you have to monitor your own HP, of course, and manage from there. You can see that once it hits turn 30, he is able to strike my entire team heavily. Which, is also good in a way. So by turn 30, your damage output should spike up a lot as well, because Mei's HP will be falling very quickly. So of course here I use the block rate. Block nullify, because previously there was an Awakened skill that completely got blocked, which is very bad. The damage drop is a lot. So yeah, I really should have used Yuri's Awakened skill here, but I got greedy, so I used the Exploit Vulnerability first. You realize that with 30 seconds on the clock, and with random Mei attacks or dragon attacks, by the time I use the Yuri Awakened skill, he is actually ready to remove the buffs that I have. So it was completely unnecessary. And definitely not good play on my part. Yeah, so I literally just used it, right before he has the buff removal skill. But anyway, my Mei is already on so low HP, so didn't make a difference. So if you think about it, my score could potentially go a lot higher. So these are my Mei's equipment: speed, double speed, okay, double HP. The HP is only revolutionary armor because of my stamps, so I didn't want to let go of my stamps. Ideally, you don't want any gear at all, any armor so that you can be able to take the most amount of damage. So for jewels, PV attack increase, crit and lethal damage increase, and here I'm using skill cooldown. You can use awakening gauge increase instead, because that is a lot better. With Ares, your skill cooldown should be very low already. and of course increase damage on offensive heroes for the traits, fighter soul, and accessories. For Yuri, max HP, defensive jewels, and willful ring. Vigor is good. For Colt, HP armor, defensive jewels, and willful ring. For Fenrir, HP armor, defensive jewels. Over here, I gave him the berserker ring so that he heals more. And for Ares, double counter, double lethal so that she lifesteals more as well. And you need status effect resist jewel on her because your front line will only have 90% resistance with the traits, so you need additional status effect jewels. Whether it's the Fallout one or the PvE one, both are okay. The PvE defense and lifesteal, and also a willful ring so that she has more health to play around with. Okay, if you can get her counter as high as possible, try to do so that you can still maintain Mei's skills. And if you use the increased awakening gauge jewel, that'll be even better. So the next team is actually from Christian. He suggested to me that he's using this team with Eileen, Ares, Aragon, and Rachel, with Mei for Shadow of Ambition. I did a few tweaks because I feel that Yuri is a lot better than Rachel. Okay, if you have Ares there, you don't really need Rachel for lethal rate increase. Yes, Rachel can boost lethal damage, but I think having Yuri as a crit damage buffer is a lot better. Okay, over here I decided to use Live Streamer School instead of Aragon. For his case, I think he's using Aragon to increase the single target skill damage, which is okay, which is definitely good. And Aragon also reduces the crit rate of Shadow of Ambition. That can be a good or bad thing, because if you reduce the crit rate, he doesn't do too much damage to your Mei, then your damage dealt out is gonna be reduced as well. So reducing damage from the dragon may not be the best thing. So here I'm using Live Streamer School instead. I know she's a limited hero, which is why I have two teams to showcase for you guys. And Live Streamer School actually is a very good companion with Eileen and Yuri. In fact, I think those three are possibly the best support right now that you can use in PvE. Live Streamer School increases lethal damage for the backline by 50% over 5 turns. Okay, so currently we are on turn 7, which means all my damage multipliers are maxed out. And if you take a look at the Awaken skill that I used, you can see that I'm dealing very high damage already very early on, which is a good thing. Skill rotation wise, nothing much has changed. You don't even need to use Live Streamer School's ability, but if you feel that you are pretty low in terms of health, you can always use a healing to get you up. In fact, if you don't have Live Streamer School, you can use Rosie for more damage mitigation, but I don't recommend that because, as I said, you really want Shadow of Ambition to do the most damage to your Mei as possible. Even healing is not recommended because healing will actually affect your Berserker Ring multipliers. So that is why you want to keep the health as low as possible and then try to deal damage from there. The bad thing about this team is that the block rate for Stormwing, I keep saying Stormwing, for Shadow of Ambition is actually pretty high. So if you don't have the guild buffs to reduce block rate, then you may face some issue in terms of damage, inconsistent damage especially. But you do have Live Streamer School's Awaken skill that can reduce block rate by 50% for 8 turns, so that's a huge deal, and you can try to cast that as well. Maybe closer to the point whereby you're gonna use Yuri's Awaken skill so that at that certain period, you know, your damage is gonna be extremely huge, and you could potentially get a good score from that. So I think in the first 20 turns or so, you're just doing very routine stuff, just trying to deal as much damage as you can while taking damage. Okay, but the last part of the battle, after Mei's HP falls by after 50%, okay, that will be the main battle that you have to fight with, and you have to challenge to get all your skills in order while looking at his cooldown and also maintaining your debuff. So again, remember, you need to use Yuri's debuff, otherwise you're gonna have a lot of issues with damage output. In fact, do take note that Ares also increases lethal damage, so she can stack with Live Streamer School actually, because their lethal damage boost works very differently. One is turn-based and one is a fixed amount applied. Okay, so you know, if I had the chance, I would definitely have possibly tried to use Ares' top skill. I think that increases lethal damage. But I don't see that's necessary, so I just went on spamming Mei's skills. That's also fine. So yeah, you can see here that, you know, I'm already dealing 5.7 million damage on the Awakened skill, and Mei's health is not even below 50%. So you can only imagine the damage capability of this team. It's incredibly good for PvE content, especially for Mei, because for Veliger teams, you probably can try to make a team with Rin, and if you do use Rin with Live Streamer Scout and Yuri, wow, the damage is huge. Okay, but over here we're using Eileen, because we don't have another magic hero. So yeah, I think this is one of the best teams for offensive Mei builds. Okay, offensive Mei teams. Of course, you can always go with what Christian suggested as well and use Aragon instead to increase your single target damage. Over here, I also realized that I'm using Kayle because I don't have the 3 offensive hero team. So using Kayle is actually pretty good. It allows you to increase your damage dealt to offensive enemies, which is Shadow here, as well as increase your single target damage, as well as decrease your skill cooldown. So in this team, your skill cooldown is really low with Kayle and Ares and guild buffs and also Fighter Soul. So there's a lot of cooldown reduction for your Mei. So you can safely use Increased Awakening Gauge for this build, so that Mei is able to get her Awakening Gauge very quickly within the use of 2 skills, or even earlier if she gets hit. So even with a physical attack decrease debuff from the dragon, you should still use Mei's skills, okay, during the first 20. Over here you see that I use Yuri's Awakened skill because obviously I learned from my lesson. So it actually helps to mitigate time, give you time for the debuff to go away. So you see that 2 turns is actually very fast. If you use 1 skill, it'll be gone the next turn. So that is why Mei is able to do such insane amount of damage over there. Previously 7 million. So just imagine how much you can get out of this skill after using Yuri's Awakened skill. The damage output is huge. So that is why I say that you should try to use it, you know, at as late as possible, but not, you know, when Mei dies, of course. So at this point, there's nothing much I can do, so I just left. These are my Mei's gears. For this build, I'm using a speed and lethal build because I don't have enough lethal without Fenrir. So I'm using speed and lethal, and then the same accessories, jewels, and armor. For her traits as well, the same. You really run blind resist and paralyzed resist so that in case the dragon counters, you will not be dealt with any status. Okay? And then with Yuri, same thing, HP armor, defensive jewels, and willful ring. Vigor is good because you'll be using her skills, but she won't take too much damage to begin with, so you can use anything with a willful ring. For Eileen, HP armor, willful ring as well. She's even worse geared than my Yuri, and she survives and she revives, so you don't have to worry too much about her, and she's not even plus 10. For Live Streamer Scout, double HP, defensive jewels, and willful ring. If you intend to heal with her for some reason, give her some weapons so that her heal is actually good enough, okay? Or you may not even want to give her weapons so that her heal won't be too big, but it will keep you alive. So that's a tip as well. And for Ares, it's the same thing, counter armor, counter build. Okay, you give status effect resist rate jewel, defensive jewels, and willful ring as well. Okay, So that's all I have for this guide. I hope it helped, and if it did, do give it a like and subscribe to my channel. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments as well, and if you have any other team suggestions, feel free to sound them off. Big shout out to my channel members ZMD Phoenix, the Mocha Cafe and Yamaki for the support. Thank you so much, and see you!